Good morning, everyone. Like she had mentioned, my name is Rossmery Zayas. I'm super excited to be here. I just quickly want to introduce.
Hi, my name is Priscilla Sanchez. I've also been with her for a couple of years.
So we'll both be speaking, but I just quickly want to introduce Priscilla before I invite her back on stage. So yeah, here she is, but she'll be jumping back in a second. But my name is Rossmery Zayas. So like she had mentioned, I'm just going to touch upon that again. I became a youth organizer when I was about 14 years old in the Southeast Los Angeles area. And I became a part of Communities for a Better Environment, and more specifically, Youth for Environmental Justice. So just to give a quick background, for folks who are not familiar with these organizations or collective spaces, Communities for a Better Environment is a 39-year-old community organization working in mainly communities of color and communities that are also low income. We're throughout the Southern California area, so aside from Southeast LA, we're also doing work in the Wilmington area and also Oakland and the Bay Area. So just to give more context to that, we're for environmental justice, and we're mainly transforming toxic communities into healthy, vibrant ones, right? So these are communities that we're living in that obviously are not looking like what they should be at this time, with a lot that's going on locally, nationally, and also globally. And I really want to emphasize what's so important about at least the space I grew up in is what for me what stood out is the fact that it's really important to me because it has three main components. One being a legal team, so like we have lawyers in this space. Two being the science and research team, which we had just mentioned. What does that look like? That can look like a lot of things. And third, which I think is the most important, is the community aspect, right? So that's the people who are coming into these spaces, using these resources, who are transforming their communities because our reality demands that we have to do that. And so as part of CBE, we have a youth component called Youth for Environmental Justice. And the reason I bring this up is because aside from Communities for a Better Environment itself, I was involved with Youth Edge. And what really amazes me about this is I can talk about it so many times, but one aspect I really, really want to point out is that we're mainly a group of high school-age youth. I started in this space when I was about 14. My two older sisters started off in this space. Now they're in their 20s, already graduating college, but my older sister became involved fighting off a power plant proposal that they were trying to do in my city, and my other sister was fighting off a similar thing. And I came into this space when we were fighting off a battery recycling plant, right? So I just really want to highlight that because here we are as young people, mainly in high school, when we should be focusing on our homework or doing our work, and here we are at the same time like working on these giant projects that directly impact us as not just like residents but also community members and people who are living in these spaces. But what's really empowering for me about Youth for Environmental Justice is the history of it. So very much like today, you all did a bunch of trainings that are gathered here in this space. So similar to that, it was a group of students in Huntington Park High School who identified in many ways. They were either, queer or undocumented, but definitely young people of color. And they created something called a summer training, very similar to what you all are doing now. So they decided that actually wasn't enough. So aside from having yearly trainings, that's how Youth Edge was created. And now we're actually 20 years old. So I just want to take a second to recognize that because that's pretty amazing work. That was started by people as young as many of you now, when resources like that weren't provided. So for me, that was just very empowering to come into this space and to see that that's what it was based off of, community research and ground truthing. And for me, that really looks like data can tell you all that you want. Actually, just now, as Sammy had asked that question, what does research mean? I stood here and I thought, community. And one thing I had told Priscilla is, if you torture statistics enough, they'll tell you what you want to hear. So for me, data isn't as important as the community aspect. The people actually looking out there saying, at this time they're doing this, or I actually see it with my own eyes, these companies or this toxic facility is doing this and that. But yeah, it's definitely something that's really important to me. But yeah, so definitely that's the background of Communities for a Better Environment and Youth for Environmental Justice. But I really want to tie into my personal story and how I grew up into this space. So growing up, I wasn't really familiar what environmental justice meant. I had no clue. To me, I was just focused on going to school. making sure I was assisting at home. Like my mom definitely, as a single parent, also I have 12 siblings, and a father had passed away for like, there's just multiple things that I think go on in our families that really at some point people think, how do you have the time to organize, to be out here today? I mean, it's a Saturday morning. Most people are either resting in from working or, just taking a break from such a busy life. But we're here because we have to be. And I'm really emphasizing that because if you're not here doing this work, no one else is going to do it. And it's super important that it comes from us because we're the ones directly impacted. So I grew up with my mother, always taking the bus. So she does limpieza, meaning, she does cleaning. And I would grow up going on the bus a lot. We traveled to Beverly Hills, going to clean homes. And it wasn't until I started to be more in middle school and high school where I was introduced to youth action as a part of CB, where I realized, like, my mother's handling very harsh chemicals to do this kind of work that necessarily wasn't regulated in certain ways. So it really made me question where my family was coming from, and that really made me look more into the background, right? So after looking into that, that's when I decided it's really important that I need to start looking at what's going on around me. I became introduced to CBE by my older sisters, who at that time were a part of this space because it was kind of a home away from home where you got to learn more about, where you're coming from, your community, aside from school and what you're reading in class. There are things that you have to, I think of it as we're learning, but at the same time, it's our duty to unlearn as well. Unlearning is super important. And I became a youth organizer in the Southeast Los Angeles area to take action and to vocalize my concerns through direct action, puppet theater, street theater, dance, summer trainings, chants, educational workshops, so much of basically what you all are doing right now. But at this time, I really, really want to invite Priscilla up on stage just because as someone who's gone through this process and as someone who's been a young person and has come to this space, she's definitely someone I have seen grown, and I've invited her here today just because I really want her to share her story, and I think it's really important that you all hear it today. So I'm just going to transition over to that.
Woo! All right, so hi everyone, my name is Priscilla Sanchez. As I said earlier, I'm 15 years old, and I'm a young woman of color, and I'm proud to say that. And I feel power in calling myself a young woman of color because each of those terms separately is usually portrayed as a weakness. People create the idea that youth don't know what's up and that women don't deserve the things women alongside other non-binary genders don't deserve the things that men have had, and that people of color are clueless. So me identifying with all three of those is kind of a sense of me seeing things as seeing things the way people don't see it usually, and me identifying how strong, capable, and woke I will be. So to start off, I want to point out how big of a role model Rossmery is for me. We've been in different footsteps, and we're going different places too, but we have different interests. But our similar identities create like an automatic bond between the two of us. We feel a lot of like the same pains that we've felt like in our community. And so like Rossmery, I've started getting involved with Youth Edge and Youth Action Club during my freshman year, around 13 or 14 years old. Which was only a year or two ago, as I said, I'm 15. Before that, I knew nothing about environmental racism at all. I knew about the term separately, like I knew racism existed, and I knew about environmental issues like recycling and plastic. And although all those things are important, it's like when I found out about environmental racism, it was like I got stabbed in the heart. Sorry. Suddenly, so many wrong things in my life made sense.
Woo!
I think it's super important to point out that it's really difficult to talk about our stories. One, because we're directly impacted, and two, aside from like doing this work, you also have like your personal life going on, your professional life going on. So, yeah, I think it's also part of the reason I'm here today, and I accepted being a keynote speaker by Sammy is mainly because it's really hard to come up in front of a group of people and open yourself up and really explain like how important this is. It's not just data, it's not just research, it's not just statistics. Like this is our livelihood. And if it isn't changed, we're the ones directly suffering from it. And that's why it's super important that people hear our narratives aside from what we're being told. And we're here really to challenge conventional narratives because, that's not the real case. But I really want to jump in on what Priscilla had just mentioned about, environmental justice and what that sounds like. So most people think about, polar bears or penguins or oceans rising, or recycling, which is super, super great. I think that's wonderful. But at the same time, one important aspect is left out, and that's community. That's the people that are also impacted. So I want to hand it back because I definitely think that's something you can talk about as something we've both chatted about is what it feels like to see, people focusing on the environmental part when people are left out. And we're here dealing with, toxic facilities. About a few minutes away, you have oil refineries. You have people who are being impacted, developing respiratory problems. We have people who are we have something called Asthma Town, only 5 to 10 minutes from where we live. And that's just one of 50 million other things we can talk about. So I definitely want to hand it back because I know Priscilla is a very, strong person who can really talk about her experience. So I'm just going to hand it right back.
Woo!
So learning the roots to environmental racism made me realize the roots to every single injustice out there. And to me, by not doing anything to destroy these roots, I'm being part of a system that takes people's lives and grades for selfish matters. And if not their life, their happiness, which is just as valuable. My community has to deal with so many health issues that aren't even our fault, yet we have to find our own solutions the hard way. My nephew is being raised on lead-contaminated soil. My parents were both pre-diabetic, while living completely different lives within the same community. I had early symptoms of bronchitis, and I use these examples because if this is happening to my family, it's happening to other people in my community, and vice versa. If something's happening to someone in my community, it's happening to my family as well. So the people that are supposed to be held accountable for this aren't being held accountable, and so we've tried their way to let them know the things that are going on, and it just doesn't work. So from the beginning of joining Youth Edge, Youth for Environmental Justice, I've decided to take on a leadership role, but my type of leadership doesn't involve a hierarchy, which is also shown to me by Youth Edge, meaning one person leads the discussion, but in the end we all create a sense of control and equality to the person either way. And by doing this, I became a leader for the Youth Action Club of my school, which was Sanchez High School. And then I started attending Youth Edge meetings on Tuesdays after school, and the moment I became a core member, things got even more real. I was fortunate enough to go to Sacramento and lobby at Governor Jerry Brown's office, and for Exide-related issues, and within time we got $1.76 million, and that all went to the cleanup of the homes in our community, so that was really good. And I spoke to the press for the first time, and I was 150% nervous, and it was obvious, but I said to myself, if I'm really passionate, I have to start sometime, and that moment was sometime. And so little by little, I came out of my shell and found where I wanted to be in life. Youth Edge also gave me the opportunity to be part of a planning for the general plan of Huntington Park. And so if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't know my dream career of being an urban planner. And so much of what Youth Edge has provided has been for myself and for all the other core members that we have. And so I'm eternally grateful for that. But even if you don't have an organization that you can join yourself, there's always things you can do on your own, and because you do have the power, and it's just a matter of finding someone that provides you that influence for you to know that you have that power. Thank you.
Woo!
Awesome. I just definitely want to give a round of applause for Priscilla one more time, just because I know that's super, super difficult to share your experience. And as someone who, now I'm 20, I've been doing it since I was about 14. I still have trouble doing it. So yeah, I definitely want to give props to Priscilla because, yeah, it's very challenging for her to be here today. But she definitely came and told y'all what's up. But I think one thing, I want to emphasize is you don't need an organization to organize. And what research and action looks like is Priscilla. It looks like me. It looks like you. And it looks like a lot of us sitting down right now. Because we're the ones ground truthing. We're the ones going beyond the books and statistics. We're challenging them. We're seeing what's actually going on. And we're making sure that at the end of the day, we're living healthy lives. And that's super, super important because not everyone is doing that work. But I kind of want to jump into this idea of research in action and ground truthing, right? So Priscilla had mentioned Exide Technologies. To give a quick background on that, Exide Technologies is a battery recycling plant. They recycled about, I want to double check this, about 40,000 batteries, I believe, per day. But the main point is, at the end of the day, they recycled these batteries that were filled with lead, and up until recently, as of March, I believe, of 2015, it was confirmed they contaminated about 10,000 homes. Keep in mind, homes is not just one person. You know, a home can be filled with many people. About 90,000 people, to give an estimate. They contaminated about 10,000 homes with lead. So that's something we're still dealing with to this day. And people think, you know, when you figure that out, okay, like the government will fix it, it'll be fixed, it's good, you know. But that's not how it works. We're still hearing about other cases. Flint still doesn't have clean water. In a way, we're still dealing with a lot of things too. At the same time, I think there's no single issue struggle. And I think that's really something I want to emphasize. But how did this happen? And I think that leads to the question of environmental racism. That's basically what it is. It's the idea that low-income communities of color are disproportionately affected by pollution, and that's clear to see. The fact is that our elected officials, many of them not elected actually, a lot of them are just disconnected from the communities that they represent. The fact is that a lot of our negotiators have blinders on, and that is why it is our duty and responsibility to do the work that we're doing. But with Exide Technologies, part of what you're not hearing, you can Google it and look on the news, but what you don't hear is the work that youth organizing, how that played into this whole story. So Exide didn't just, as of March 15, that's when it, you know, came on the news and people heard about it, but we've been dealing with this for about 3 decades, 30 years. So by the time I came into the space, you know, it's been years since people have been going to testify, to lobbying, going to these meetings, doing protests. I mentioned earlier I was a part of a lot of like street theater and die-in, so we would be present. We were always present, but why is it that, you know, 30 years later, that's when attention came to it, and that was mainly because Exide was fined about $500 million. EPA was not necessarily, they were accepting, you know, the fines, but that really didn't solve the issue. That was bandage solutions. So it was the community that made it happen. You know, we're the ones that brought attention to it. We're the ones who made sure that there's accountability, and that really is what ground truthing is. It's making sure that, you know, ground truthing to me is you're literally what it sounds like. You're on the ground and you're telling everyone what the truth is. You're the one there. You're present. You're a primary source. It's not the same thing as being like a researcher or someone who doesn't live in the community. So yeah, I really wanted to emphasize Exide and how that played a role into our community, because till this day, even though they're shut down, which is what we did, we're still dealing with people who are impacted with, you know, medical reasons, or people who are already dealing with other cumulative impacts. So, right, we live by about 5 freeways, which already increases the chances of having cancer. We're facing diesel truck pollution. We're not too far from Wilmington, which is, as of, you know, not too far from now. Actually, exactly a week ago was the People's Climate March. We were there talking about how the oil industries are impacting local community members. We have people having nosebleeds. We have oil refineries funding schools, funding field trips, and we can see how that's a problem. Just why I think it's really important with the work you all are doing here is, you know, a lot of you are challenging that. You're looking into it. Even by inviting me today, you know, you're opening your minds to what is going on around you and how you can be a part of that solution. And to me, solutions look very interesting. It looks different for everyone. So I actually went to Paris for COP21 to talk about Exide, and even then it was a bit frustrating because for the amount of time I've been doing work, I've never once seen Governor Jerry Brown, ever. I would say I started when I was about 14, I'm 20 now, and I didn't see Jerry Brown until Posh Hotel, sustainability in California. A lot of what was being said was, California is better than most other states or yada, yada, yada. But as we can see, that's not the case. We literally have people surviving. We've had people who had lost friends, family members to illness, to cancer, and that's what's motivating us every single day. As much as we don't want to have to go out and protest and do all of these things, our reality really demands that we do so. But while I was in Paris, I really made sure to, the theme of this is amplifying your voice, and that's exactly what I did. I challenged myself to step out of my comfort zone and do the right thing. Do what's important, share my experience, and I think people think, oh, you have to have, a major experience or something like that for it to be important, but every single one of your experience is your own. You have your own experience, and that is your own truth, and you have to plug that into this larger idea of finding solutions, which at the end of the day, it's community-rooted solutions. Each community looks very different. Solutions for Southeast LA, in a way, can be a bit different from Wilmington. They deal mainly with oil refineries. We deal mainly with, like a lot of facilities, toxic facilities, diesel truck pollution, things like that. Although it all ties together, solutions can look very different for a lot of communities. But part of the reason, we're here talking about all of this is to remind you all that behind a lot of what you're looking into or reading or the projects you're doing, there are people that are directly impacted, and that's the number one thing I think we should be thinking about and considering is how people are being, how does it impact the person in the community? We can talk about a community as much as we want, but what about the people living in there? And also recognizing that a lot of these communities have been socially conscious, and a lot of the work you're doing is not introducing them to environmental justice, but in a way it's already highlighting the work that has been done and is continuously being done. But now, as I mentioned, I graduated from high school and I decided to actually major in communication with social change and rhetoric, just so I can do exactly that, challenge conventional narratives and really highlight social consciousness already present. A lot of my friends want to graduate, the idea is to get this bachelor's degree, get as much money as you can and move. Because the further away you live, maybe the healthier you'll be, or the better life you'll have. But that's the exact reason I'm staying here. I actually attended Humboldt State University, a very beautiful place, Northern California, my first year in college. And I realized that, it didn't feel right to me. It's not my community. I transferred back to the Los Angeles area, and I'm continuously doing this work because it has to be done. And what really, in a way, it's saddening, although beautiful at the same time. My two older sisters were doing this work. I'm doing this work now, and now my two younger sisters, both in middle school, are. That's powerful, but it also reminds me why we all have to be very strong in the work we're doing, because no one wants to have a child or have a younger sibling grow up and have to do the same work you're doing now. Like, that isn't the point. The point is we're doing this so we make sure that future generations don't have to deal with it later on. And that's why it's super, super important that we're out here today. But, at first I didn't believe I was the person to talk about climate change. I didn't feel like I knew the words or the terms. I'd hear people speaking to me. I was like, they sound too smart, or I have no clue what that means. We have to recognize our experience. We have to recognize that all of us are important. And you don't need a degree or certain terms to recognize your experience in any way. You are your own person, and you're an expert on your own life. You know your experiences. And for me, at least, I know that. I know how much my community suffers. As a young woman of color in the Southeast Los Angeles area, I definitely am rooted in the struggle for environmental justice. So I'm also challenging myself now by ending it in this way, but I wanted to end it by reading a poem I had wrote. I've recently been writing as a way to put a lot of the energy I've been experiencing in my everyday life, ground truthing and going out there on the front line. I've been shifting that a bit into writing, one, to reach out more to community members, and two, that's my own way of, I guess, contributing and playing into this work. So research and action doesn't just look like, it doesn't just look like attending a workshop or doing something like that. As Priscilla has mentioned, you don't need an organization to organize. You don't need, a certain space. Like, you can do it as an individual person, and we're all playing into this larger picture. But I'm going to end by reading this poem, and it's called I'm Not Over It. I think it's really hard to talk politics, but it's necessary when political's personal. It became my business when colonizers thought our culture was burnable. Get over it. while the books of my Mayan ancestors became ashes in the wind. Get over it. But the fires of oppression never dimmed. Get over it. But how do we get over the past 500 years? You ask us to forget the trail of tears, demand we forgive and forget the deaths on plantations, black bodies shriveled up like raisins. Slavery's over, but families still splatter, yet it's white tears over Black Lives Matter, and it's white hands that try to be the silencer. Don't believe me? As Asian Pacific Islanders, the book of our lives just turn the page, and you will see where our blood boils and where our hearts are racing. But get over it. We all bleed the same as what they say, except when you're too dark or if you're gay. But this is the land for free for you and me. It's okay, we love you, why can't you see? Because America, where is the liberty? Guns, bombs, and Muslim terrorists. The news on the lives make you want to call a therapist to explain what a shame it's like to be trapped inside a game where you don't make the rules, but you have to play, always losing because there's no right way to win. Everything we do is a sin. Don't mean to ruin your plans if I support trans, but you need to accept all identities, accept us in all forms and entities, accept that there are a million ways to do things differently. To attach papers together, we are used to staples. But tape and glue sticks do the same thing. In many ways, we are differently abled. What's your point? I know it's okay to be different, but it's only okay to you if we don't bend, because then everything is triggering to you. It was a joke, chill, but whipping and lynching was once a bill. Sorry, I didn't know, I know. No one was born understanding system of oppression. White America was born to hide that lesson. We are taught we need a white savior, but that's how we got here in the first place, by white sailors. Okay, you made your point, I'm listening. All right, let me explain. Wait, you're stiffening. Well, Rosemary, you're a hypocrite too. You contribute every day with the things that you do. And Rosemary, even if you're right, you're still a contradiction. See, that's the thing. Dismantling while surviving. This is a juxtaposition. For every victory, there's another fight, and I don't care how long it takes, even if it takes all night. Scared to use my voice because others were louder, but to speak up is to have power. Thank you.